Hello, hello, hello. Happy Sunday afternoon. Let's see. So I guess we're today. I said that, or I've been saying that we're going to take a look at this Hydra deck, this mono green Hydra deck. It's one of the beginner decks, and I keep putting it off, and it's probably time that I go ahead and take. We'll take it apart. We'll look through all of the pieces. We'll see if there needs to be any improvements, or if there's anything that we can identify as a problem. And I think we have at least one thing that we're going to make a change to, and then we'll kind of look through some other cards and maybe see if we can't find something more to fit in and help with the deck, because the deck I think needs just a little bit of, like, it doesn't need a big advantage. It just needs a little bit more of an advantage than it's been getting. We had several games where we either had no mana or we had all the mana, and that was all we did, which is partially shuffling for sure. But I think that it happened too many times in a row, and it makes me concerned that maybe it needs a little bit more work, because this is coming off of a different change that I made quite a while ago, and it seemed like it was an okay change. But I'm kind of wondering if maybe we need to take some more looks at it and try again. But if you're here and this is the first time that you've been seeing the stream, I do on Sundays. I do beginner stuff. I do kind of not necessarily the perfect method for teaching how to play Magic, but we basically play, or I play multiple decks at the same time. And on Sundays, the decks that I play are all beginner decks. They're the decks that I actually do use for teaching Magic, and have a number of times in the past. And they're monocolored decks. They're all tribal. They're all kind of aggro, which means that their goal is to do attacking more than trying to create some kind of insane Rube, Rube Goldberg machine kind of thing. We're not trying to do that, and we're not trying to kind of play cards that control our opponents into doing what we want them to do until we win the games. So, like, that kind of stuff, those are other kinds of strategies. All of these are just get creatures out and try to bash your opponents in the face with them. And for the most part, it works out. So then on Wednesdays or Thursdays, I stream again and I play more complex decks, because I have a lot of different decks that I can play. So we just kind of do random stuff on those days, but it's less about, like, necessarily explaining every single move. Like, I still kind of explain the moves that the choices that I'm making, and I try to justify them as logically as I can, to kind of make it fair and to make it understandable, because the group dynamics are really hard, and getting it right every single time doesn't always work. So you'll see me there. You'll see me on these 2 days. Those are kind of the days that I stream. And yeah, so I guess let's go ahead and get into this. Like I said, our goal here isn't to rebuild this deck. We're not actually building this deck at all. I mean, the deck is already built. So all we're really looking for is something that could identify why we're having a problem. And I think what I want to do is start out actually with the land here. So let me get out the non-basic land. There. And I think the non-basic land are all okay, but what we have, so we have 6 non-basic land, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 31 forests. So total, we have 37 land. And I, if you're unfamiliar with deck building, or I mean, if you're familiar with deck building, maybe you understand already what could be the problem here. So if you're not familiar too much with deck building, we're probably short on a land. We do have ramp in the deck, and probably enough ramp that might justify this, but I think that we may be one land short. I think we need one more land. So I've already gone ahead and pulled out a forest, so we can find a card in the deck, in the non-land cards, and try to figure out where to put that land or what to exchange for it, essentially. because as much as we could make this whole deck into ramp and get out Gargos really quickly. But we do want to kind of make it remain Hydra tribal as much as we can. And that was the last change that we made. The last change moved this deck from being really Enchantress focused into being more Hydra focused. And that was because we had like 16 out of 28 creatures were Hydras. So we had like 12 non-Hydra creatures in the deck. And then I moved that so that it was more like, I think it's something like 20 out of 23 creatures are Hydras now. So we increased the number of Hydras and decreased the number of creatures and added some other stuff into it and took out some of the Enchantress elements to kind of make more of a Hydra deck. It still has Enchantress stuff in here. It's not all gone or anything, because there's some really good and kind of Enchantress type spells. But we took all of that out, and I'm wondering if in that process we took some of the stuff out that helped smooth out this 37 land deal. So yeah, we're going to see what we can do about that, and maybe that'll help for future games here. So let me go ahead and start separating this into different piles. And when we look at the cards that we plan on using for building a deck, you really want to identify what its purpose in the deck is. And essentially, you're going to aim for getting a certain number of cards for each category, essentially, or at least understand why a particular category exists. And most of the common ones are stuff like ramp and card draw and removal. Those are all, like your very classic deck building categories that you want to have something in for. Pretty much every deck should have some amount of those three. If you don't, then if you're taking out something like ramp, for instance, like some decks have very little ramp. The beginner goblin deck that I played a number of times has a little less ramp than the other decks do. And the reason that is because very few of the cards in the goblin deck are more than 3 mana, essentially. There's like a handful of, like, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 4-cost cards, and then like 1 5-cost card or something like that. It's just that there's just not very many. So we don't need much ramp because we can live off of 3 land, essentially. Play the entire game with that much. So that's not the case for this mono green deck. We're going to want a solid amount of both the card draw and the ramp if we can. And I think the removal that we'll have will deal with specific scenarios, because generally Gargos is going to be our creature removal. So since creature removal is just spammed, like stapled onto this Hydra card, because essentially whenever any of your creatures get targeted by anything, then Gargos goes and tries to eat something else. So we don't need as much creature removal in this deck, which is a plus, but we still definitely need card draw and enough ramp. So those will be some of the stuff. So this is a card draw card. It's an enchantment that at the beginning of our upkeep we draw a card if we have a creature with power 4 or greater. So this is, I don't know necessarily how I want to organize this too much in terms of like spatially speaking, visually speaking. So this pile is going to be cards that deal directly with Gargos' ability. We need a pile for the Hydras. This is a target, Hydra, target. This is a support card, which is kind of awkward. It's probably one of the weakest sort of groups, categories that you can probably have. It's probably the category where we're more likely to take things from, because they're sort of stuff like, this is a really good, this card, so this card in particular, it's a support card in the sense that you choose when you cast it, you choose a permanent type, and you get to return all of those permanent types from your graveyard to your hand. So if we're getting pretty late in the game and somebody's killed off a bunch of our Hydras, we can use this to get all of those Hydras back. But that's a very specific scenario. We may never get to the end game. We may lose before that. We may win before that. We may not get rid of, or lose track of all of our hydras. So there is a question about whether or not this is a good card to have, and we really want to keep our eye out on stuff like that. So let's see. I guess let me rearrange it like this. So this is stuff that's going to deal with the hydras and Gargos in general, and stuff over here is going to be kind of like generic stuff that's like the things that all decks will want to have. So card draw, and this is ramp. This is going to be more card draw than anything. Removal is the other one that's kind of iconic here. So targeting, this is more or less going to be card draw. So this Vivian Reed Planeswalker, she definitely has different abilities, and her second ability is a destroy target something or other, right? But her first ability, her plus ability, is looking at the top card of your or looking at the top 4 cards of your library and taking out either a creature or a land. So that essentially for us, that's going to just act like a card draw effect, essentially. And especially with with being able to repeat it, that's also going to be good. So some more ramp, another Hydra. This is a support card. Let's see. This is another target, Hydra, ramp, target, Hydra, target, Hydra, target, target, Hydra, target, Hydra. This isn't a Hydra, this is a support card. It's one of the few non-creature stuff. Non-Hydra creatures. Sandworm Convergence. I consider this to be removal. It's not technically removal because it's not destroying anything. It's more of a support card, but its purpose is specifically to stop flying creatures from attacking us, which is why a little earlier you could see me pulling out some worms. Oh, I guess these are 6/6s. Pergaber. I'll have to look and see if I have 5/5 worms somewhere. So yeah, this one eliminates all of the flying creatures for us. We don't have a lot of flying protection, so this is our card to help with that, and it's going to act like a removal card essentially. This is a support card. This is more card draw. So this one in particular, this Planeswalker creates 3/3 beasts as its first ability. So creating creatures as blockers may seem more like a support card because we're not necessarily dealing anything with beasts. It's really the second ability, though. As this card is going to act as a, more or less, most of the time, going to act as a 5-cost, -3 ability to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. So this is sort of something that we'd go, okay, we've wasted all of our resources to get Gargos out. Our next turn we'll play Garruk Primal Hunter and then draw 8 cards by having Gargos out as an 8/7. So that's sort of his purpose there. So we have some, oh no, that's removal. This is targeting. This is ramp. This is more support. Removal. This is actually a support card. This is ramp, removal, Hydra, support, Hydra, ramp, Hydra, targeting, and beast within is a removal card. Oh, okay, so that is some good piles. We do have some pretty big piles here. Thankfully, since it's all Hydras, we're confident. I'm confident that we're not getting rid of any Hydras. I'm going to go and set that to the side. We are not going to not use the Hydras that we have. We're not going to take any out. We're going to keep all of those in. With the rest of this stuff, so let's go ahead and look. So a removal package here. We have flying stuff. We have this is flying removal. Artifacts and enchantments. Actually, a lot of artifact and enchantment removal, and then any permanent removal. So this is maybe the good thing is that I think where we're where you would be lacking in having this as your entire removal package would be you don't have anything destroy creatures essentially. Like yes, this one stops flying creatures, and yes, this one destroys a permanent, but wrath effects are really good. It's just that with Gargos, we so quickly eat up creatures with the number of like we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 17 18 19. We have 19 cards that we can use to target Gargos or other creatures that we control. So that essentially each of these cards act as a pump effect and as a removal card. That's always going to be really good for us. So we don't really need I don't think we need too many more, so that's why our focus is so heavily on in our removal package, so heavily on these artifacts and enchantment removal, because we can afford to make a lot of it into that. Now, flying creatures can be a problem if we can't stick Gargos for long enough, kind of thing, and if they have multiple flyers that Gargos can't eat them, like they happen to be a big flyer. Sandworm Convergence definitely is going to help us out in that regard. And I mean, it gives us a 5/5 worm to help as blocking as well. So I think our removal package is probably okay for now. I would say it's less on the line of things that we want to take out. So let's look at our card draw, and I can immediately tell you we need more card draw. One of the things about Enchantress was that we had card draw effects. I think this is too few. I think this is way too few. That we need more. We need a lot more. We need probably, if we can get at least 2 more cards in this section, then we'll be much better off than what we have been in the past in other games. So give me a second. So what cards do we need to add here? Let's go ahead and start with a list. So we need 1 forest, and we need 2 times card draw. So that's what we're going to try to look for, is some card draw effects that we can stick in here. And that's what we're going to aim for, I think. We may not end up having anything more to add, but that's what we're going to be trying for. So at this point we need to try to find 3 cards to remove out of this deck. And I think I think I already kind of know what cards I might remove, but we don't want to remove any of these. I mean, Colossal Majesty isn't really that great. If we have another card draw effect on hand that's better than this one, then we'll almost certainly use it. Okay, so we have that. Let's look at our ramp. Our ramp is actually really healthy here. This actually is really, really good. So we have a cheap ramp here. We have multiple cheap ramp effects here. These are all really good ones. Cultivate is actually really good. These 2 are a little bit on the lower end of being potentially not that good. Overgrowth fits into the wild growth ability, which is why it's there. Plus, being an enchantment, it's kind of a leftover from the really straight Enchantress build. And Sky Shroud Claim, it's definitely not bad, and I think it ends up being okay. There's not too many cards at this converted mana cost that are going to be better than Sky Shroud Claim, because it searches up for 2 force and puts them into play untapped. I don't really think that there's basically no other card that does that, and since it's specific to forests, that's the limiting factor a lot of times. But in this case, yeah, I think I'm kind of okay with. I think I'm okay with what we have here. As we go through cards, maybe we see another ramp card that we might like better than the Overgrowth. But for now, let's go ahead and keep it and say it's okay. So I'm going to continue moving these groups past, like on the other side of Gargos, to indicate that we're okay with what's there. So let's look at our support cards. So here we have, I guess this is a support card, but it's only I guess it's more of a card draw effect, because it's whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, you can draw a card. Let's go ahead and put that in card draw. I still want more card draw than that, but we're going to put that there. That's how we're going to justify keeping it, is probably that. So we have these three non-Hydra creatures and then these effects down here. So it's a really good question to understand whether or not these cards here are worth our time. Now, Vigor, almost always yes. This is such a good card. It's so strong, and none of the other decks have it, and it's going to be very impactful and very fun to see when somebody who's new to playing gets to see this and see really what it does. This is going to be incredible, and I think I don't know that I ever want to take it out. Spearbreaker Behemoth. I like this card a lot. It's so costly. It's 7 mana for a 5/5, but ultimately this is one of our best support cards because it has a pay 1 target creature with power 5 or greater is indestructible until end of turn. So this one makes it so that we can just sit and hold open mana every turn that we need to make sure that people can't get rid of Gargos. And this also will help us make Gargos indestructible and then fight as many times in a single turn as we want. So I don't know that I really ever want to get rid of this card. Now we come to Genesis, which is very close to Creeping Renaissance. And both of these cards return things from the graveyard. Particularly, they'll return creatures from the graveyard. I don't know that I necessarily like either of them. They are very good in decks that need the returning stuff, and we don't have like a ton of creatures in our deck. But Gargos kind of makes up for a lot of that, and both of these cards being as costly as they are, I'm inclined to believe that maybe they're not what we want ultimately. I'm kind of inclined to believe that because when we compare it to these two cards, so in Mighty Emergence, whenever a creature with power 5 or greater and it comes into play under your control, they get 2+1/+1 counters. Most of our Hydras, most of the creatures that we're going to play are going to come in based on the amount of mana that we play. Some of them that don't, like this Hydra Broodmaster, comes into play with, or is a 7/7 when it enters the battlefield. This is a 5/5, so not as much. This will probably always be a 3/3, which may justify looking into whether or not it's a card that we want, but it still has all of the abilities: Vigilance, Reach, Trample. Those are all good, and it's a low cost Hydra, so I'm kind of inclined to keep it. But like a lot of these Hydras are going to come into play as being big boys. And Mighty Emergence is going to make them just that much bigger, so we don't have to inevitably pay quite as much mana to make them a big creature. With it being a status effect and all of that, I think that we can say that Mighty Emergence is going to be okay. That's actually, let's put it over here. Leering Emblem, with so much of our deck bent on targeting stuff, I think that Leering Emblem also makes it worth it, especially with Gargos. So what will happen is if we can get Leering Emblem on Gargos, what we do is we go, okay, well, let's go ahead and do Monstrify and target Gargos. So then in response, Gargos will try to eat a creature. Well, let's say the creature that we need to kill is a big creature, has 7 power, say, which would be enough to kill Gargos. If we didn't have the Leering Emblem, then we would target with Monstrify, Gargos would eat the other creature and then die, and then the Monstrify effect would disappear because the +4/+4 happens after Gargos does the eating. So we could get into situations where the effect that would save Gargos is the effect that ends up destroying him. That's where Leering Emblem comes in. Leering Emblem is a cheap equipment that when we target with Monstrify, Gargos gets its trigger, but Leering Emblem also gets a trigger because it's whenever you play a spell, and this is whenever a creature you control becomes a target. So when they both go on the stack, you can choose which order they go in, and you can give Gargos a +2/+2 before it has to fight. And it keeps getting more and more +2s every time you target it after that. So I think that with this setup, with Leering Emblem, we do a really good job of protecting Gargos from killing himself by his own effect. Since it triggers at the exact same time as the fight ability. So I think that this is still a really good card. It's a really good card. It's on the edge though. It's not like the best support card that we have. It's just a good one. So at the moment, I'm inclined to these would be good cards to trade for card draw so that we can get into more land, we can get into more targeting effects, we can get into more hydras. It would be nice to be able to return hydras from our graveyard, but we have like 20 of them. We have to be able to draw the hydras first. So I think these are on our cutting board right now. Now let's look at, we're going to set those all the way off to the side along with this. So we'll put it right there. Okay, so we need to decide what these effects are really doing here. So we have repeatable ones. So Monsterify is a repeatable one. We have really, really big effects. This costs a lot of mana for an enchant creature. It costs 6 mana, but when it enchants, it gives that creature plus 6 +1/+1 counters, and every time that creature attacks, it gets more of them. So that's a really good one. Or we want to separate that one from the rest of these is what I mean. Okay, so Nature's Way is a creature you control gets Vigilance and Trample, and then it fights something. So I think this one is kind of in a class of its own. It's a one use only kind of thing, but it gives up. Essentially, we can go Gargos, fight something, and then now kill something else. So the double effect for 2 mana is going to be really strong. This is a protection one. This creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. So I think that's another class of stuff. So we still have one-time effects, though. So this Primal Bellows gives +1/+1 for each force you control. It's a one-use only, though. So it's kind of on the lower end of stuff that we want to see. Put 5 +1/+1 counters, and you can cast it a second time. That's kind of a repeatable one. This is a one-time use. This is kind of one-time use. It doesn't. It puts 1 +1/+1 counter on the creature, and then it doubles the counters every turn. So you could kind of say that it's a repeatable one, but it only targets once, and that's kind of what I mean here. Is that this is targeting more than once. This one can target more than once because it returns itself from the graveyard. Same for right here. This one is a protection one because whenever the creature dies, then this totem armor, or would die, then this totem armor triggers and destroys the enchantment instead. Rancor is repeatable. This is sort of single target only. Actually, this is protection. This is doubling up on damage. This is repeatable. This is a big enchantment. This is the double fighting sort of thing. And this one is also sort of the protection because it's another totem armor one. So we don't really want to get rid of too many of these, I think. I really like how many sort of repeatable ones that we have access to. The bigger ones may be one that we consider exchanging around. I do like the idea of having these big enchantments. So the only problem is that when you have a big enchantment, then that gets in the way of casting a big Hydra, right? But it's kind of hard to ignore this +7/+7 and trample until end of turn. I mean, sorry, not until end of turn. This +7/+7 and trample is hard to really ignore. The trample being the key word there. So I think this one kind of seems like maybe it's off, but I think that I want to compare it to a different one, and I think the one I want to compare it to is the Soul's Might. So we'll get to that here in a second, but this repeatable one, really good. Shape of the Wittigo, I really like. Just continuously getting +1/+1 counters, that's going to be good. I don't really want to get rid of these doubling up on the fight stuff. And see, protection stuff, we don't need too many of them. Essentially what they're going to act as is Mortal's Resolve target creature gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn. That's really, really good. So if anybody tries to destroy everything on the board, we can just be like, no, you're not going to destroy this one creature. So I think these are good. The question is these single-use only ones. See, and I think regeneration is one of the strongest one of these. Because being able to just pay a green to regenerate, that means that we can keep targeting Gargos several times in a single turn without having to worry about him dying, because the regenerate will help us. The Hydra's growth, doubling the number of counters on a creature each of your upkeeps, is going to be extraordinarily strong, and it being called Hydra's growth, I think it probably stays. It is sort of a question about Primal Bellow. I think maybe if we had this as another one of the doubling up on fight, we might want to consider that. But these were sort of the ones that I have. These three, Nature's Way, Rabid Bite, and Ram Through, were some of the best ones that were there. If it was instant speed, maybe it would be if Rabid Bite was instant speed, then it would be even better. So maybe we'll keep an eye out for instant speed stuff like that. But for now, I think these ones are okay. It's really between this Prodigious Growth and Soul's Might. Let me think about this while I take a sip. So, between these two, they're really similar. 6 mana versus 5 mana. They're both sorcery speed. They both have a semi-permanent effect, because this one gives +1/+1 counters, and this gives +7/+7. Now, this one is based only on the creature's power, so when it targets Gargos, we're going to get 8 counters on it, which is certainly more than this for the mana. But the problem between these two is the trample. Prodigious Growth gives the trample, and Soul's Might does not. And even though they could just destroy this enchantment, and Gargos would lose that +7/+7. Whereas if we did this, it would be they would have to kill Gargos. But for me, it's my tear here is still the trample. We don't have a lot of trample effects in the deck. Gargos with this and trample becomes unbeatable against most of the decks that this card is going to face off against. Very few of the decks have something that can so quickly and so few cards get this strong. That doesn't mean that they can't. It just means that in general, this is going to be much more powerful than most of what anybody else is going to get. And the trample is what puts us over the edge, because all of the other decks have the ability to block. Almost every single deck creates tokens, some number of tokens. The big tri-mono blue, which is tribal hydras, or not hydras, tribal sphinxes, and the mono black big tribal, which is tribal demons. So demons and sphinxes, those can create some tokens, but they don't have very many. They have much fewer than anybody else, other than this Gargos deck. So tokens can be spit out all of the time by most of the decks, which is a problem for this deck, which has so few creatures, and we need every creature to be able to connect. So we need them to have to sacrifice most of their tokens in a single attack to be able to stop our trample damage. And that's why I think Soul's Might in this particular case is the weaker card. Even though we even also have some +1/+1 counter effects in our deck, I don't think that's enough to justify this card. And I think that's why I've kind of decided that that's what I want to remove. So we're going to go with these three. We already have one replacement here. So we got our replacement for, let's just say, Soul's Might. It doesn't really matter particularly, but this is one exchange we're going to make. is this one right here. So now we need to find a couple of card draw effects. I did pull some of the, you can see these stacks of cards here. I don't remember where all of that stuff is necessarily, so we're just going to kind of go through here pretty quickly and just try to find anything that seems like it might be okay. Now, Bequeathal might be okay. This one, when enchanted creatures put into the graveyard, draw 2 cards, and it only costs 1, and it targets, so that might be okay. Let's see. Cetessan Tactics might be worth considering. This is something separate. Hunter's Insight could draw us cards, and it targets. Let's see here. Now we put those away for a reason. Let's see. Do we have some other like colorless cards? There's another Rancor. Yay. I am really bad about keeping cards organized. Very, very bad. Let's see. So this is one of the cards that we could have put in if we were more of an Enchantress deck, but we're really not now. So we have another copy of Season of Growth, but if we were enchantment stuff, then I would this would be it. This would be one of them immediately. But in this case, not. So Spider, yeah, it doesn't look like anything here. What about this other stuff that we have? Well, actually, what about this? This looks like it might be a green pile. Oh, yeah, there you go. So here's where a couple of other enchantment stuff comes from. Like, these were 2 other Enchantress cards that were in the deck, so they're not there anymore, unfortunately. Let's see. Oh, and there's another one, Nelia's Colossus. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, double target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. just destroys things. Sense and speed. Let's see. Nope. Doesn't. We're looking for card draw. Where's our card draw? I mean, Toshi would be nice, but it doesn't really give us what we want. Investigate is sometimes good, but still not really. Inspiring Call. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter. Well, that's card draw, but it's not. We're not +1/+1 countering too much. So, let's see. Not any card draw. Where's all of our green card draw? Not here, apparently. Not in this pile, anyway. We have some more in this pile. Let's see. Worldly Tutor. No, we need something like... Let me think. If we had Harmonize, I think Harmonize would be an immediate, let's do it. But we need to find one. Let's see, do we have, nope, that's Ramp Schmamp. Cream of the Crop is really good, but it doesn't really do what we need. We just need like straight card draw. So I guess Wheel of Knowledge is not necessarily really what we want, but it is something. So if we can't find anything else that's kind of like lower tier, but at least we can pay it as many times as we need to draw cards. So this is card draw with in an enchantment. Let's see. No, not really. This is card draw, but again, it's like whenever you play a creature spell this turn, draw a card, but we're not playing a lot of creatures all at once, so it's not going to be very good for us. Okay. Well, that's that gets us a little closer. Let's see if we have anything in here. And I'm not expecting there to be too much stuff. I guess we do. We can at least consider those. It's always good to at least consider some, because that's not card draw, but it'd at least mix up our hand a little bit and maybe get us into things that we need. No, because this is... Yeah. Green has gotten a lot of card draw lately. It used to be a like a color of magic that didn't get quite as many card draw effects as something like blue. Like, I think green was like third on the list, basically, because white and red are the ones that have the lowest amount of card draw, with black and blue being the most, and then green was sort of third on that list. But they've gotten a lot of card draw, and a lot of really good card draw, which is probably why we're not finding any, because they're all in other decks. Okay, so nothing there. We have plenty of cards to go through. This was just random piles that I could grab easy in preparation for doing this today. So lots of colors that we don't care about, unfortunately. Well, infiltration lens, we might as well consider it. It can be a really good one, and being able to repeatedly do it is also really good, because it's an equipment that whenever you block, or whenever the equipped creature gets blocked, you draw 2 cards. So people are definitely going to be trying to block Gargos. Nobody wants to take 8 damage to the face, but we also, like I said, we may be killing all the creatures that they may block with, so that's no good. So we don't want it to be too expensive of a card either. Let's see. This is all junk from other decks that I was building. I say junk, not really junk, but just cards that didn't make the cut for other decks. Let's see here. What's this one? What is this pile? Oh, okay. I know what this pile is. This was me building a Grixmas deck. Let's see. Gotta be a little careful I don't go too fast in this one. Oh man. Changeling Titan would be really good. Let's see. No. It's like, so these are cards that are so close to being things that we want to see, but then they're just not quite there. We do want to consider graveyard removal would be good against a few different of these decks, but I don't know. We'll think about that some other time. Commander Sphere is good, but I think that I want something that can get us some more cards more regularly, instead of just, like, we can't really take advantage of it, so, like, we're not going to be returning it from our graveyard, is what I mean. We're not going to be returning Commander Sphere from our graveyard, and we don't need more ramp at this point. Although, let's see. Let's go ahead and take this out. I know that's kind of weird. We're taking out cards that I didn't intend to, but that Myriad Landscape is going to be a really good card for this deck, so I want to make sure to take it out. Brr. Man, Verdant Rebirth, you're so good. Brr, that's... Oh, Harmonize, there we go. There's our card. That's almost certainly going in, unless we just see something crazy good. I'm glad we found that. I'm honestly really glad that we found that. Okay, none of these. Do we have anything else? Even a single thing? that we might want to use. Oh, Shamanic Revelation. Oh no, because we're not gonna have very many creatures out. Ugh. Harmonize is always going to be better in this deck. That's draw a card and then you may... Bonder's Ornament. I mean, maybe? It's another not good card. Because it's just, I'm going to say no to that one. It's not... I have that Bonder's Ornament in some decks. Because I can, like, reduce the cost, or I don't mind, because I'll always have, like, tons of mana. But I think that... Yeah, just don't... Not... We're having a problem with mana, and adding something in that's... I mean, it's a ramp card, but it's also... It costs 3 mana and only ramps 1 mana, and, like, we can do better. So, I don't know. Okay. Let's look at what card draw we have. This is good enough file. Harmonize is, like, all the way up there. These are ones that I'm not particularly pleased about, and these are all okay. Well, Hunter's Insight. Okay, so Hunter's Insight. When this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. Now, it does target, so at least we can hit things first, but we really need the trample. That's the problem, right? So yeah, we can target Gargos to eat a creature and then attack that same player that had the creature that we killed and hope to draw 8 cards, but I don't know, it just seems like the problem is that if this card gave trample, so that when they blocked, like if this cost 1 more mana and gave trample, and then it was like choose target creature and then draw cards for each for how much damage you deal, then what we could do is we could say, okay, Gargos attack. They would chump block with some stupid creature. We'd be like, oh, Hunter's Insight. Bam, we're going to target Gargos. Gargos eats the other creature. Then there's no... And we get trample, so then there's no blocker. And so they take the full amount of damage and we draw 8 cards. That would be amazing. That would be a really good card for this, specifically for this deck. I don't know if it's necessarily a card that they'd ever want to print, but it could be a card. Even if it was 5 mana, we would probably play that card. But in this case, it's kind of like, okay, so let's say that same scenario. They block, we target Gargos, it eats the blocker. The problem is it's still considered to be blocked, even though the blocker died. So all of the damage gets absorbed into the ether, and my opponent takes none of it. If we do it before we declare attackers, if we say, okay, well, we're going to give Gargos, Hunter's Insight, it'll eat one of your chump blockers, and will attack you. They could still be like, well, I don't want you to draw 8 cards, and sacrifice something else, like put something else in front of Gargos. So yeah, you did use 2 cards to kill 2 of their cards, effectively, but we don't get to draw any cards, and so essentially this card's effect is kind of moot. So I think that this ends up actually being lower than we want. So now we have Harmonize, or I'm convinced we're running it. Like at this point, I'm just kind of like, yep, we're doing it. So here we go. That's that one. We've made that exchange. Now we have the rest of these. So when creature dies, or when enchanted creature is put into the graveyard, draw 2 cards. I'm less inclined to say this one because we don't know when Gargos is going to die, or any of our creatures are going to die for that matter. So it's kind of between these two. And like I said, without trample, the effect about dealing combat damage to a player, which this one is based off of, becomes less useful, whereas this infiltration lens is whenever it becomes blocked, we'll draw 2 cards, and that's much more likely a scenario to happen with this Gargos deck than something else. So I think Infiltration Lens actually kind of wins out on some of these, against some of these. So let's make sure that, like we said, these no for sure. I think we're kind of no on those. So let's look at these three. The problem with these three is that, right here, these ones, is that they're all group effects. They all happen to everybody. Now, this one a little less so, because it happens to everybody, but it's everybody basically at the beginning of their draw phase. They put all the cards from their hand onto the bottom of their library and then draw that many cards. So it disrupts everybody else's hand, but it also disrupts our hand. So yes, we do get to see more cards, but we're not taking advantage of the effect here. So I don't know that Teferi's Puzzle Box, even though it doesn't give an advantage, like we can certainly use it to help us get through the cards, but it's not drawing us any extra cards. And I think that might be why this one isn't going to work. So now we're down to these two. One of them, you can only pay the cost during your upkeep, or during your draw phase. You can only pay the mana to draw extra cards. So we can't control when a player does it, really. Like, they get to choose when they get to draw cards, and it's always on their turn. Otherworld Atlas, we can make it so that they draw cards when we want them to draw cards. But the problem is that it's guaranteed draw, whereas Well of Knowledge, they have to pay to be able to use the effect. So, comparing these two to Infiltration Lens, I dislike both of them for this case. There are decks that use these, but in this case, I just think that they're not as good. We're not getting as much. Like, if we could get ridiculously more mana than anybody else, if we could guarantee that we get tons more mana than everybody so that we could always outdraw everybody else, then Well of Knowledge is going to be better than Otherworld Atlas. Otherworld Atlas is good if we can essentially neutralize the cards that our opponents have whenever they draw them. Like, we have effects that make it so that they can't take advantage of having more cards in their hand than we can. Like, maybe we have a card like Rule of Law that makes it so that you can only cast one spell each turn. That might be a case where Otherworld Atlas does some good, but it's certainly not going to do good in this deck, because we can control when they draw, but we're not going to essentially be able to utilize more of our cards than they are. And Well of Knowledge, like I said, we're not generally necessarily generating way more mana than anybody else. So everybody's going to draw about the same amount as we do. So I think that this card also kind of goes away. So that means that now we're down to this. And so I think I've justified enough including Infiltration Lens here. So hopefully with a little bit more card draw, and another land, hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit better now. So let's look at the cards that we didn't necessarily intend to pull out. I think that we don't have... Yeah, so we don't have the Myriad Landscape. Let's go ahead and just trade a forest for the Myriad Landscape. So let's say that one, sure. We'll take out this land and put it in Myriad Landscape. It comes into play tapped, but what you can do with it is you pay 2 mana and sacrifice it, and you get 2 forests out of it. So it's a little slow on the ramp side, but it's still a good one, especially because the 2 basic lands that you get out of it have to be the same type. So this card doesn't work so well in like a 2-color deck, and it basically is useless in any number of colors above that, like 3 or 4 or 5 color decks. Not going to be very good. So I like going ahead and including it here, because what happens is on our turn 3, say we had this and 2 forests, we could use our turn 3 to get to 4 mana, and potentially on our 4th turn we'll play another land and be at 5 mana. So we'll be a little in advanced, and our turn 3 and our turn 4 may not see any other effects that we care about because we're on the heavier side of mana costs. So I think that that's a good one to do. Now, Cetessan Tactics. The reason I pulled this one out, we're going to look real close. We're going to look real quickly at the these cards right here. So we have 2 sorceries and we have an instant. The reason I pulled this out is because it is an instant speed that allows us to fight. So let me think about this. I think that between these two, so Nature's Way and Rabid Bite, they have the same effect, except Nature's Way also gives Vigilance and Trample. So they're both sorceries, same cost, same, you deal damage equal to your power to a creature you don't control, except that this one has slightly more effects to it, and the Trample is really useful. So I think that's one's really good. So it's really between these. Is it better that our opponent is able to fight us back? Because this isn't true fight, this is. This is the actual fight ability. But we do get +1/+1. We can target more creatures if we want to fight more. But the downside is that our creatures have to be able to be untapped in order to get the additional fight effect. So, and if we do it, we potentially tap down Gargos. So it's a good question. I'm not sure how I do this necessarily. I kind of I think I'm going to do it just on the basis of one is an instant and the other is not. I think that that's what it comes down to, is that being able to mid-combat target Gargos with an instant speed effect to fight something when we need it to happen, or make it happen on an opponent's turn. I think that value, even if we don't end up doing the double fighting, I think that value might be good. So I think that's one more change we're going to make. Okay, so that's all of the deck. We've kind of gone through it. I've kind of explained exactly why we have the cards that we have in here. I do want to be sure, so we're done with this. I do want to be sure that we talk a little bit about building mana bases, because I haven't talked about that the other times that we've done these deck building things, which I'm going to do periodically. And I think that what after doing this and setting aside, like pulling apart this deck and going through each of the different categories that we have in here and explaining why I did it the way that I did it, I think I want to do that with some of the other beginner decks, because I think you can tell that there's some design thought put into these, especially because I have to juggle so closely this deck's power versus 9 other decks' power that I know that this will play against. So I want to be sure that I'm doing a good job. And mana base is really simple with this one, but it's still worth talking a little bit about. So you can see I have some non-basic lands here. And then just a ton of forests. And that's mainly because when it comes to this is a green heavy deck. 2 mana cost, I guess 1, but 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. There's a bunch of mana, colored mana needed in each of these mana, in a bunch of these different mana costs. So we want to be sure we can play or have as much green mana up as we can. So we don't necessarily need too many non-basic lands. Now there's certainly a ton of non-basic lands that you can put into these decks and get a lot of effects out of. For now, this is pretty straightforward, simplified. For one, because I don't necessarily have just stockpiles of every single non-basic land, but also just because it doesn't really need too many. We have some additional ramp effects, essentially. So Crystal Vein, you can sacrifice it for 2 colorless mana. Havenwood Battleground you can sacrifice for 2 green mana. And then these 2 are land cards that ramp when you need to. So, like, you can most of the non-basic lands here are to try to get to higher levels of mana, especially because we can't put something like Nyx. What is it? There's a crap. What is it called? I need to look it up now. Just give me a second. Shrine to Nyx. It's something like that. Shrine to Nyx. What is it? Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. There you go. So Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, and maybe I do this so you can see. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Okay, there we go. We're getting there. So that one, you can pay 2 mana, tap it, and choose a color, and then add mana to your mana pool equal to your devotion to that color. So I certainly have a lot of green mana symbols, right? But the problem is that they're all on big cards. If I had a bunch of tiny cards, like if this was the elf deck, I'm going to have a bunch of elves out at any given time. That effect is going to be really strong, but in this Gargos deck, we will have some out, but Nykthos Shrine to Nyx doesn't start to get good until you have at least 4 symbols out. So we're going to have to, it's not going to be very good for helping us get Gargos out. It's going to be good once we already have Gargos out. But if we already have Gargos out, he has his ability, which reduces the cost of Hydras by 4. So the value for Nykthos Shrine to Nyx goes down the higher costing cards that we have. So in this case, that's a really good card for mono green decks in general, just not this one. So that's why you don't see it here, is because even though I'm sure that I could probably find another copy of it, it just doesn't fit what this deck is trying to do. Now, I think that these other 2, so this one right here, Bonder's Enclave, it has an ability to draw a card if we control a creature with power 4 or greater. So more card draw effects. Good. Oran Reef, the Vastwood, is probably one of the... It might be a little on the weaker side for this deck. I think that I put this in mainly because its effect to be able to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature that entered the battlefield this turn can be really good, and we do have a little bit of light +1/+1 counter related stuff. But it's probably... If I think about it and I decide to look into more non-basic land cards, I'm probably going to find something to replace it. It's not something that I've looked towards with this deck, but the point here with this, with explaining this, is that when it comes to this particular build, we don't need too many non-basic lands, because all of our effect, like, we want to be sure that we have the colored mana, and we want to have lands that come into play untapped, so we can get away with, like 32 basic lands. So I may look into some of the other basic lands that we might be able to put into this deck, but I think that for the most part, this is probably how it's going to be, and that's sort of the reasoning for doing it this way, is that you kind of want to choose your non-basic lands to play towards your deck strengths. You don't want to just throw in a bunch of non-basic lands just because. Now, if we had more than one color, then we would almost certainly take this card out, and we would probably put maybe 3 or 4 more, or change 3 or 4 more of these forests into, like, all of these would turn into lands that have both, or that can tap for either of the 2 mana that we have in the deck. Because, like, these cards, well, I guess if non-basic land cards are all about utility. They happen that you want them to either tap for more than one color of mana, or you want them to do something special, and you don't want too many of them because you want to still be able to cast cards. The only the only exception to that is pretty much colorless decks, because so many of the support cards, like Bonder's Enclave right here, it only taps for colorless mana. So if you were a colorless deck, then this counts as it counts as a regular land to you. You don't have to worry about whether or not it's a support card, or a card that's getting you the mana that you need to cast the cards that you do. But putting that aside, I mean, with any deck that has two or more colors, you don't want too many of any kind of support cards. You're going to use most of your non-basic lands to fix your mana, to be able to have, because like if you're playing red blue and you have like a ton of mountains, or even just an equal number of mountains and islands, you could get away with it, but it's always good to be able to have some lands that tap for either color mana, so that you're not caught with your pants down. So this build doesn't need any of that. It doesn't need too much support cards. It just needs to be able to cast the cards that are in its deck. So that's kind of a light rundown of mana base, and I'll try to think more about it. That was kind of spontaneous, so I'll try to think more about it and give a better idea for how you might build your mana base. And if you're out there and you have more questions about it, then go ahead and write in the comments when I post this on YouTube, and just let me know what questions you have, and I'll try to help answer your specific questions. So I think that's going to do it for today. I don't have much else to do. We're not going to play a game. We're not going to take a look at this. We're just going to go ahead and call it here, I think. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great Sunday. And catch me on Wednesday or Thursday if you want to see the next game that we're going to do. I'm not sure what we're going to do this upcoming week. Last week we did kind of group hug and chaos decks, just basically four group hug decks, more or less, or at least had some kind of group mechanics to them. I may just pick 3 or 4 random decks for Wednesday or Thursday, but that's what's upcoming, and I guess I'll see you all next time.